Hi, everyone. Before I say anything else, I'm going to talk about the sun and the moon. Tomorrow, they'll be pretty close together in the sky. Today's March 9th, tomorrow, March 10th. The moon will be passing somewhat south of the sun, so it won't be very interesting, certainly not visible. But then the next orbit of the moon is going to be super interesting, as you probably know. But just in case, I'm bringing it up here. April 8th. If you're in the right place on Earth, you'll see them line up. And it's a wondrous sight. And I hope if you haven't made plans already, make plans to get into that path of totality. The partial eclipse is really not terribly interesting, and the total eclipse is profound. It's amazing experience, and I hope all of us are successful at finding blue skies, no clouds, and to watch this incredible spectacle. Last one until I think 20 years from now, up in like Montana or something. That's the next one inside the United States. All right. Well, let me get over to our regularly scheduled program here. So I want to welcome you to the monthly lecture series of the National Capital Area Skeptics. I'm Scott Snell, the current president, live streaming from the Washington, D.C. area. As a nonprofit educational and scientific membership organization that promotes critical thinking and scientific understanding, we've been hosting these monthly events free and open to the public since our founding in 1987. Our guest today is also active in a member-supported educational nonprofit dedicated to furthering knowledge and critical thinking. He's science writer Brian Dunning, executive director of Skeptoid Media. He's host and producer of the Skeptoid podcast, one of the longest running and most popular independent science podcasts. He's appeared on numerous radio shows and television documentaries, hosts the science video series, In Fact, with Brian Dunning. That's the show that brings you the real facts behind popular myths. And he wrote and produced the documentary films Here Be Dragons and Principles of Curiosity. Last year, he discussed with us his previous film, Science Friction, a documentary on how scientists are misrepresented in the media. Today, I'll be discussing his latest film, the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us from Oregon, USA, Brian Dunning.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thanks for joining us. You have a bit of a cough today, and I appreciate that you're able
I
to
do.
carry on with us
Yeah,
here.
I'm going to be hitting the mute button a lot, so thank you for putting up with that.
Sure. Well, listen, I mentioned science friction, which I enjoyed. A lot of us, I know, enjoyed this, and we discussed about a year ago with you. And this being your latest film, what made you decide, hey, I'm going to make my next film about UFOs?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm the obsessed UFO guy who has to make movies about UFOs and nothing else. You know, we make movies in pursuit of our mission statement. This is, promoting science literacy and critical thinking. And each time we make a movie, we had just finished science friction. It was time to plan the next one. It's like, okay, what's going to be the best way to do that? And the best way to do that is to find out what is a hot topic right now. What are people thinking about? What are people talking about? What's a topic that's going to sell itself because it's already got a lot of traffic on the internet and whatnot. And the answer to that was pretty clear because the UFO thing has just been so ridiculously overblown for the past ever since 2017
Yes.
that it was kind of the obvious choice. So we took the structure of how do we teach critical thinking and how do we get people to make science literacy a part of their daily thought process and put it in the context of the UFO phenomenon. So it's kind of the UFO movie is a Trojan horse to deliver our secret payload of critical thinking instruction.
Yeah, you're turning trash into treasure, springboarding from this bogus science into genuine science. And I really like that. I've talked to other people too that really appreciate your ability to, I guess, leverage the interest in the public
Right.
into something worthwhile. Do you see a target audience here? Like who would be the youngest viewer that you would say, hey, this fits their, age group and so on?
Well, I mean, you raise a really interesting question with the target audience. Uh, the the target audience for this was going to be anyone who is on the fence about UFOs, right? And we wanted to better inform whatever their thoughts on UFOs were, whether they were skeptical, whether they're a believer, whether they're curious. We wanted to better inform their thoughts with real astrophysics, real astrobiology, and it turned out that kind of to my surprise, although I shouldn't have been surprised, that the vast majority of people who have watched the movie were people who were hoping that it was going to be another fully credulous UFO film that reinforced their beliefs. And a lot of people came away disappointed with that. So that's at least the very vocal portion of the audience. Um, so I mean, if you look at the YouTube comments, because the movie was on streaming services for a few months, and that has a hump, and once that starts to trail off, we throw it up on YouTube so that more people can see it.
Yes.
And you get direct feedback there because you get no feedback from the streaming services. But on
Yes.
YouTube, you get direct feedback. Now it's still like 80% positive in terms of thumbs up and thumbs down.
Uh-huh.
So 80% of people like it, but almost all of the comments, like 99% of the comments, are negative. So most people are enjoying it, but not saying anything about it. The people who are saying anything about it are the ones who were very angry that it did not support their preconceived notions.
Mhm. If I may, I'll share comments from somebody who liked it. So I talked with a longtime friend of mine who watched the movie with me this week, and he's interested in this question of UFOs and extraterrestrial life and so on. But you'll see he really appreciates your perspective on the question. How do you come into this and not just wildly speculate? And at times you do speculate, but you label it there in a very careful way so the viewer isn't misled. And I'll just read off some of his comments here. He liked how you set the tone very early on in your own personal way of you want this, obviously you care about what's real. And the possibility of extraterrestrial life is a very real possibility.
Yeah.
And that we're all excited about life elsewhere. So immediately you're almost certainly establishing rapport with everyone watching, which is awesome. And then, but you're also going to say, hey, we're going to stay, on the track with science, reason, setting bias aside, and you really provide a level of credibility. Now, forgive me, I have another comment for myself. And that is, you establish that rapport really well, and yet you use a particular phrase where you say, the media has been cramming this down our throats since 2017. So that sort of sends a strong signal, I should say, that sends a strong signal to the open-minded viewer of, oh, this person thinks UFOs are not worth the attention that the news media is giving. And I say that respectfully. What are your thoughts about your script, and at that point where you say they're cramming it down our throats? And it's true that your personal perspective is there, and you let the audience know quickly, and I think that's very candid. But does that perhaps risk your rapport with the audience at the beginning of the program?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think I was pretty clear about what I'm going to say, and then I said what I was going to say. What is happening on that picture up there? Is that actually, that was really weird. Can everyone see that, or am I just talking about something that nobody else can see? Nobody else can see it. Okay, I'm being signaled. Never mind. Forgive that. Forgive that bizarre aberration.
All right. By the way, you said you saw something. That's interesting. At the beginning of your movie, you said you saw 3 UFOs, and
Yeah,
then quickly,
we got a little bit off track there.
yep. you were able to quickly see what they determine what they were, but it was exciting briefly until you realized. May I ask what was the story on that?
Yeah. The first one was I was camping in Death Valley with a couple of buddies, and one of whom is a incurable conspiracy theorist. He believes everything that in the world that's false, and nothing can change his mind. And we saw kind of the typical thing. It's nighttime, and we saw the big black triangle outlined by lights flying overhead, and it went from horizon to horizon, completely silent, and it kind of made a big orbit behind the hills and behind the horizon, so that about 10 or 15 minutes it came around a second time. And again, just like I said in the film, for those 10 or 15 minutes, I had no idea what it was, and my mind was completely blown. This was like the most exciting moment of my life, these minutes where I didn't know what I had just seen. And when it came around the second time, we very quickly realized what it was. And anyone who knows where Death Valley is, it's right next to the China Lake Naval Weapons Center. This was a formation of F-18s doing aerial refueling at night. So, I mean, there was your triangle. You got the refueling plane in the front, and the plane right behind it, and everyone else standing by down the sides. So that was really, really cool. And the second time was the first time I saw a Starlink train. I had never, I knew all about the Starlink satellites, of course, but I didn't happen to know that when they were all released by the launch vehicle, that they came off in that great long line like that. So we saw the Starlink train going over our property here one night, and my God, I was the best guess that I had was this was some kind of a missile event. Like I know they don't send missiles in a big long line either, but I couldn't think what else it was. So it blew my mind, and I ran inside, and I was all over the internet, and I soon discovered, that's what a Starlink train looks like. So that was another major wow moment. And the third one was a very, very cool case where a friend of mine told me that he had a UFO that was flying over his house every night, predictably, and did I want to come over and see it? And so I went to his house in Petaluma, and there's my use of the mute button. He was standing outside. He was on the second floor of an apartment complex, and we're standing at his door, and he's pointing up in the sky. Says several times a night, this thing will go whoosh, just go flying by at kind of this improbable speed through the sky. And we stood there a while, and we finally saw it. It was just this light that went kind of horizontally across the sky in front of us. And we both like sat down and just like dug our teeth in and walked over there and walked around and tried to figure out what it was, and we solved it. It was you know how a lot of times when you've got a blind driveway coming out on the street, they'll have one of those convex mirrors so that you can see a wide angle view of what cars might be coming.
Yes.
There was one of those at the entrance to his parking lot, and right near that was an intersection. Long story short, what would happen was when a car would make a turn at that intersection, their headlights would sweep across that concave mirror, and that would reflect the headlight beam onto a power line that was going across over the parking lot. And just this little beam from the mirror would go sweeping down the power line and look like a light. It was really quite improbable and quite striking to figure out what it was, but that was another really fun aha moment. But again, once I saw it the first time, I go, oh my God, that's wild. What the heck could that be? And it's repeatable. So
the Death Valley sighting, when you were with your very paranormal-ish friend, was he convinced by this refueling explanation?
Yeah, no, and that's the reason I mentioned it, because no, he was not convinced by that. To everyone else, it was quite clear, but I already knew that this guy was not gonna buy into it. So I don't know what he thinks to this day, but it's probably that he's insistent that was aliens.
Has he seen your movie?
I don't know. I actually haven't talked to him for a while. We kind of have a falling out over the many years of Skeptoid.
Ah, I see. That would be interesting. I mean, it sounds like he's pretty set in his ways. If he was here, I'd ask him, these refueling missions go on, so we should expect to see that plus UFOs in his
Exactly.
worldview.
Yeah.
And since we only see a refueling, it suggests that that's the UFO. But um, uh, getting back to my question about science friction, your documentary about
Mhm.
scientists being misrepresented by the media. How is your experience of making this film as compared to that earlier one? I know, excuse me, the difficulties you had to overcome with that previous movie. And what about this one? When you think about them sort of in the big picture, lessons learned, I assume, from your previous film that were applied to this newest, but anything else?
You mean from like a nuts and bolts production standpoint, or
Or even just in a very general sense, but I guess anything that you might consider, as a professional filmmaker, right down to what a regular person might say, "Oh, that's interesting that you had so much trouble trying to get this released," or something like
uh,
that. Forgive me for being so vague because I'm not a specialist myself, obviously.
I think the most interesting difference between the two films for me was Science Friction was unhosted. There was no host on the screen. It's just the people, the interview subjects telling their stories.
Right.
And so it's a 100% talking heads movie.
Mhm.
And you don't know what they're going to say. So you got an hour of footage from each interview, and they end up being 5 minutes of screen time at most.
Mhm.
So you got to get all those transcribed, and you got to go through and see what footage is usable, and then limit the transcription to that. Then you got 500 pages of text. You got to now boil this down. How do you construct a narrative storyline out of that?
Mhm.
And in the UFO movie, it was different. The UFO movie was completely written beginning to end before the camera ever turned on,
Mhm.
with the exception that the interviews, I didn't know what the people were going to say in the interviews, but I knew what their opinions were on everything. And so I was able to, write in like temporary text. Dakota Tyler is going to talk about why gravitational lensing, but whatever. And so I would have a general idea. So I was able to write the entire thing, do the interviews, ask the questions several times, get several versions of the answers, take the one that was best, closest to what of the temporary text that I'd written in,
Mhm.
and then rewrite the interstitials, my narration around that. So you had much more control over the content doing
Mhm.
it that way. With science friction, you have less control. Most of the people who were in science friction, I didn't know and I hadn't met before.
Mhm.
And you don't necessarily know. And we shot a lot more interviews than we used. We
Mhm.
shot probably 3 times as many interviews as we used. And we talked to probably twice as many people as we interviewed. So what you're seeing in science friction is a very small subset. It was just kind of, um, I wish I could say it was the best of the best, but it wasn't. The best stuff people ended up changing their minds and not wanting us to use in the
Yeah,
film.
I remember you saying that
Yeah.
when you got cold feet. Um, to me as a viewer, I might add the following to your comparison, and that is science friction, that material that you were that topic, you were 100% certain what you were dealing with, right? Because you had documentary evidence of, hey, this person said X, and it didn't come out that way in the final program on, the History Channel or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas you're diving into the UFO topic that's, 80 some years old and just so much filled with um, well, there's junk there, but there's also honest. Hey, we don't understand what we're seeing here. The low information zone. By the way, my friend that I talked with really appreciated that concept.
Oh, good.
Ironically, to bring clarity to the concept of not being able to get very clear photographs and so on. Actually, would you? discuss the low information zone in detail here, because it's so important, I think, to looking at photos and videos as you did.
Yeah, so the low information zone is that comes from Mick West. I think that's going to be Mick West's enduring contribution to the field of ufology, but it also applies to, Bigfoot hunting and anything else where we're dealing with poor quality evidence, usually coming from cameras.
Mhm,
And the low information zone simply refers to, at its most literal sense, it refers to that distance that's far enough away from the camera that we can't make out any useful details.
mhm,
If you're doing audio recordings, it's anything that's outside of the range of the microphone that can be clearly captured.
mhm,
And so we see that almost all ghost photographs, Bigfoot photographs, UFO photographs, these all come from the low information zone.
mhm,
Because when they're not in the low information zone, when they're closer, when they're in the high information zone, we can identify them.
mhm.
And so far, there have been no exceptions to that. There have been no super clear photographs of UFOs that we haven't eventually tracked down to say, we know that this is a CGI made by this film student, or oh, this is this guy, the little model that this guy in Florida made. The low information zone is where everything that remains an unidentified flying object lives.
Mhm. Uh, in your film, uh, actually, I'm going to post here this beautiful NASA exoplanets video that you excerpted during the during your film, and let's see, that worked. And you mentioned in your film that at the time, this is about 2 years ago, NASA had found about 5,000 exoplanets, that is, planets going around other stars in our galaxy.
Yeah.
And I looked in before today's program. What are we up to? So it's gone up by about 12%, like 5,500 or something,
Yeah, that's about right.
instead of 5,000. And so and then you also say, that based on these the estimates that we have, tens of billions of potentially for exoplanets here, and then your thought that how many might have civilizations with history and culture and so on. That again, echoing my friend's earlier comment about how well you establish rapport with the viewer, and you have a visual description that makes us think about something in a visual way. It's a great way to persuade because you're making a connection there. And of course, we might be thinking of science fiction that we've seen all our lives, these movies and so on, but it actually could be something that no human has ever imagined. It's really in terms of the details, it's a wonderful way to connect. And you're in central New Mexico, if I estimated correctly, at the Very Large Array. Is that
No, everyone gets that wrong. Everyone thinks we're at the Very Large Array. No, this is the Owens Valley Radio Observatory in California,
okay.
just east of the Sierra Mountains.
All right. I'm completely unfamiliar with that, so I'll look that up later. Interesting. And in a way, it's almost like trying to solve a UFO case because I wasn't sure what I was seeing, and I settled on what looked to me the most likely. And of course, I got the identification wrong. And by the way, there's a funny aspect to that because as you're continuing to film and the daylight slips away and you're at night, uh, there are stationary red objects, sort of disc-like, over your shoulder as you're talking. And of course, those aren't UFOs. We know exactly what they are. I assume it's to avoid aircraft issues with these tall antennas. But I thought that was a lovely, probably unintentional sort of like here's some UFOs in the film, and they're not actually UFOs.
I've been really surprised by how many people have pointed that out because you know, like you say, the film starts in the daylight, goes through the night, and opens up in the daylight again. And
Mhm.
so you see those lights on that dish the entire film.
That's right.
and and so, but I guess a lot of people didn't notice them until it was dark, and then they thought that it was I had CG'd in a couple of red light UFOs or something. It's like,
Yeah, that's you didn't intend it, but it's a wonderful way for the viewer to realize their own limitations, perhaps in a
sure,
completely
yeah,
respectful way.
a
It's
little
like
microcosm there.
that's right, yeah, and it's not intentional. It's a just an accident of how you performed this or produced this film, and it comes out in this wonderful way, I think, and hopefully other people will too, if they're fooled by it and then realize, okay, you put UFOs in the movie and
I
then
did.
identify them. Let's see. Let me check in again as we're going here. By the way, we have some of the nitty gritty, and I do want to get that in terms of filmmaking. You were outdoors. How did you get the audio so clear?
Very high quality microphone.
Mhm.
Yeah, just the cinematographer who was there just has very high end gear, and in fact, he was telling me before he was trying to pitch me on using this location. I had another location in mind, and he lives in no, I forget what little town in the mountains up in California, and we're having a Zoom late one night, and he's saying, "No, no, no! I tell you, I can get you, and I can get the stars in the sky, and I can get the antenna at night, and you can see it all." And I say, "There's no camera in the world that can do all of that." So he goes out into his driveway and sets all that stuff up in like 10 minutes,
Mhm.
and takes a little test footage of himself that looked a lot like the footage of me in the movie.
Mhm.
So we had me mic'd, I think, a couple of different ways. We had a lav on me, and we had the one we ended up using was the audio from this really, really good pro shotgun mic that was like just about a foot above my forehead. And it's just super high end equipment. I remember thinking the same thing. Like, God, that audio sounds great.
Mhm.
Sounds way better than the podcast audio I record. And it was outdoors,
Mhm.
and there's literally no noise out there in the desert. I mean, that's a super quiet part of the desert. You don't hear anything. That's why it's such a great location for the radio telescopes. There's just nothing out there.
Mhm.
So yeah, we were lucky we had no wind at all. We were extremely cold. In fact, I legitimately got hypothermia that night.
Wow.
Um, that's a whole story in itself, though.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it was a blast. A lot of good adventures that weekend.
Mhm. I love your hoodie with the rocketry is better than I assume ghosts. And is that for sale somewhere? I
Yeah,
didn't.
I was trying to see if I had one around. Am I wearing that? No. The rocket is better than Ghost. Um, yeah, that's one of our standard little T-shirts that we sell at Skeptoid. So
Cool.
if you go to the store at skeptoid.com, you can buy a hoodie or a T-shirt with that on it.
Mhm.
And the great thing about that design, God, I wish I had. I don't even have anything right by here that I can hold up to show. Yeah, I don't. Um, it's a rocket and then a little greater than sign and a ghost.
Mhm.
And the great thing about that shirt is it is by far the biggest conversation starter shirt I've ever worn out in public.
Mhm.
Anytime you wear that, someone guaranteed someone's gonna ask you, "Oh, what does your shirt mean?" And I always ask them, "What do you think it means?" And people they come up with really creative stuff. I always say science is better than pseudoscience.
Right.
That's how I interpret it. But I hear people come up with better ones than that all the time. It's really a neat design, and obviously it was perfect for this movie.
Mhm.
So I made sure that was on camera the whole time.
Do you remember the most remarkable surprise interpretation that you've heard from, the public?
I don't remember a good one specifically. I mean, usually people say space ghost. That's really lame. Come up with something better than that.
Um, let's see. You described early in the film about the possibility of life out there and go over the numbers of the exoplanets and so on. And one of our participants today up in New Jersey, Rob Palmer, the well-known skeptic.
Hi, Rob.
Yes. Rob notes that there are disagreements on how likely the evolution of advanced aliens is really, the Drake equation, what those numbers turn out to be. We're making progress, of course, filling in the numbers of that comprise that equation. But anyway, did you maybe want to speak a little bit about that? Where you're optimistic and there are somewhat pessimistic numbers, and where you sort of fit into the spectrum, I should say that, in the range of pessimists versus optimists about the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations in our galaxy.
Yeah, I thought that was I thought it was going to be very important for the film to be as optimistic as is supportable.
Yes.
Again, it's so important to establish common ground with the viewers and to establish, hey, we all want the same thing. We all want aliens to be real. We all want to meet aliens. There's nobody in the world that wouldn't love to meet aliens. So it's really important that I felt that we erred on the optimistic side of things there. I didn't go into the Drake equation specifically. I mean, obviously, a lot of stuff in the movie that we talk about is directly relevant to the Drake equation. I decided not to go into that because it's just a little bit too science-y, and I know that from experience that turns off a lot of audiences. So I decided not to bring the Drake equation up by name. The astrobiologist who's in the movie, Dr. Caitlin Rasmussen, she's actually got a book coming out on the Drake equation called Life in Seven Numbers, which is a great title. And that should be out. I'm not sure. I haven't talked to her lately. Probably within the year, I'm sure. Life in Seven Numbers. Look for it.
All right.
And establishing that that there is real science and real math behind the probability that there's life out there was really important. And I tried to be clear that we don't know these facts, that all we can do is guess at these. In fact, the famous quote about the Drake equation is what Frank Drake said about it himself, which is that it's only useful for organizing our ignorance. So, which is true and kind of sad, but we wish we had better estimates for those numbers. The interesting thing is people don't realize the SETI Institute. The SETI Institute, obviously, where Frank Drake was a senior astronomer before he died, and the Drake equation is named after him. And that's where he worked, and that's where Seth Shostak, that many of your audience probably know, that's where he is. What do? They don't just sit around and listen to headphones and listen for signals all day. That's kind of a misnomer. That's a very, very small part of what they do. They're a broad spectrum research organization. They're grant funded. They've got, something over about 100 scientists, I think, working there, full-time employed on grants doing various research projects. And their mission is to research anything that impacts any of the variables in the Drake equation. So I was there one day and they introduced me to a woman who's studying whale languages. I'm going, whale languages? What does that have to do with the SETI Institute? It's like, well, that impacts, how likely is a civilization to develop language and abstract concepts like that. So SETI Institute is a very, very cool science institute.
Yeah, by the way, your film was screened there back in October.
Yeah.
And I saw the ad for it, unfortunately, after it had already occurred, and it said there will be a brief question and answer session afterwards. Brief turned out to be 90 minutes.
It was 45 minutes and then 90 minutes after that. So the three of us, Frank and Seth and I, did the standard 45 minutes. And then we said, hey, we'll stay on a little bit longer if anyone wants to stick around. We still had 450 people in the chat. It was by far the biggest online event I'd done. And so Seth and I stayed there for another 90 minutes. And just the fact that the SETI Institute wanted to screen the film, I considered that the absolute pinnacle of what I hoped the film might achieve. So I
Mhm.
was very, very honored that they picked it to screen.
I'd love to be able to watch or listen to that Q&A. I searched with futility, unfortunately,
Uh,
because it's like, oh, the specialists and of course others as well, but to have the specialists in that subject matter, working, asking questions and commenting and so on, that would be a really precious resource, I think, if that could be posted online. I don't know if you have contact with Seth or any of the other SETI Institute faculty or employees, if they might have a recording of that.
yeah, I have no idea. That's their marketing team that I'm in touch with. So
Oh, I
yeah, I
see.
could talk to them and see if they have if they posted that anywhere. I don't know.
Mhm. One of our participants asked if you would talk about, since we're discussing SETI now, the idea of looking at particular points in the radio frequency spectrum at this so-called watering hole, and why that is thought to be perhaps a very likely place for the galactic community, if in fact there is one, to
Yeah.
go looking there and perhaps transmit there. If you would discuss this watering hole.
Yeah, the water hole frequency is the nickname for a frequency kind of named after like the water cooler at the office where everyone would come and gather and have a conversation.
Mhm,
So any hypothetical civilization out there that understands science and that understands the basics of how the universe works is going to know probably all the same basic things about it that we do,
mhm,
such as, the dominant frequency out there is the frequency at which interstellar hydrogen precesses just out in space between the galaxies and
mhm,
between the stars. And if you're going to transmit a signal to someone and you hope for it to be received, you want a frequency that people are going to know to look for. And so that water hole frequency, that 1.42 gigahertz, I think, I could be wrong. I think that's what it is. That's kind of a flag that's planted in the galaxy. Tune
mhm,
here. This is what everyone's listening to. And it also has the advantages of cutting through atmospheres. It's at a good enough frequency that it's going to reach through atmospheres better than other frequencies are likely to. And
mhm,
it's also a relatively quiet band. There's not a lot of other noise interfering with it out there.
mhm.
So it's got a lot of things going for it. As if we were going to send a signal out into space, if we had a planet that we were desperately trying to reach because we saw something about this planet's spectrum that indicates, hey, there's a really good chance that there's life there. We
Mhm.
see technosignatures or biosignatures. We would probably use the water hole frequency to
Mhm.
transmit a message to them.
The participant responds with mahalo, which I assume means that they're joining us from Hawaii, um, and asks about the wow signal. So you mentioned that in the movie, and whether there was any capability to see if there was some information within that, maybe a message, or was it?
Uh, the wow signal, if you I would throw a graphic up if I had one handy, but if you've seen the printout, it's an old typewriter printer,
Mhm,
and there's just strings of numbers and letters, 0 through 9, and then A through Z,
mhm,
representing the strength of the signal. And the
mhm,
wow signal is only like 8 or 9 characters long. It goes from basically 0 up through some numbers up into high alphabets and letters, and then some numbers, and then back down to 0.
mhm,
So it just basically describes a brief spike in signal,
mhm.
far too low resolution to have any kind of a message encoded in it.
I see. I've posted this image in a link so people can, while they're watching this, in a replay later, they can look in and see what you're describing. Um, I did wonder, and I couldn't find information about this. It's that region where the WOW signal emanated from is very, very close to the ecliptic. Does the ecliptic actually pass through the WOW region?
That's a good question. I don't happen to know.
Okay,
I know it was near, it was in the direction of the Sagittarius constellation
that's right.
for people who are into astrology.
Or astronomy. Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I emailed Seth Shostak earlier this week, and I was like, I doubt he'll respond, but I'll check my inbox later to see if he answered that question. And the reason that's so interesting, as you probably know, is that the ecliptic is the plane of Earth's orbit, and also the Earth's shadow is cast by the sun. In other words, if there's an alien civilization and they're on the ecliptic in their distant part of the galaxy,
I see what you're getting at. Yeah.
and there's no intervening matter that prevents Earth and the solar system from and the sun from being seen, they would see Earth transit the sun. And just as we do with exoplanets that we discover. And so it's like, oh, if they see Earth transiting, they might send a signal here saying, hey, there's this planet that's, such and such size and probably has water, based on their remote sensing and so on. So I was like, oh, I'd love to see that, how close it is to the ecliptic, and I couldn't find it. So anyway, hopefully, I'm sure someone has already considered that question.
I'm going to show you a picture right here.
Yeah.
Do you see that okay?
Oh, yes.
So this is exactly what happens when you look at a star and a planet crosses in front of it. That's
Mhm.
the dip in the light curve. Now it's
Right.
going to be very, very small because a planet is very small compared to the size of the sun. So I mean, when we zoom out, we find it's a much bigger picture than that. But this particular picture, I'm just going to take a quick sidebar and boast for a moment. Um, my daughter is a grad student in astrophysics at San Diego State,
Yeah.
and her project is attempting to find the 17th known circumbinary exoplanet. So a planet orbiting a binary star system.
Uh-huh.
16 of them are known. She's hoping to find number 17, and this is a candidate in her data. And it looks pretty damn good to me. But there's a lot, this is super preliminary, and I probably shouldn't have said anything, and it's probably not that. But anyway, that's what she's working on right now. So I just had to boast about that. Thank you.
That's all right. You're a proud papa, and
Yeah.
you got your occultation data there, and you couldn't hold back. I sympathize. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And to add to some of the information here, so a binary star or two stars that are orbiting each other, and there are, surprisingly enough, stable orbits for a planet that go around both of them. I assume it's an elliptical orbit rather than some sort of figure eight or something weird like that.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
This is her field, not mine.
See. Anyway, that's really cool. By the way,
Yeah.
of course, when you show an occultation event like that, I can't help but think about the eclipse again on April 8th. I'm obsessing. My apologies. Um, let's see. Early in the film, you talk about the Christmas tree situation of, you're optimistic for the purposes of the film about extraterrestrial civilizations arising elsewhere in our galaxy, but that they have a lifetime, and that's one of the elements in the Drake equation. How long do these civilizations that can create radio waves and do other things, how long do they exist? And so you use the metaphor of these flashing Christmas lights. And I did want to ask you about that because your Christmas lights are dark and then they flash on and then they go dark. and then they flash on again, of course. And did you intend for that metaphor to be carried forward, that these super civilizations fall like the Roman Empire, but then they rise again?
No, that was not intended to be implied.
Okay,
That the Christmas tree problem is just basically the fact that a light's going to blink on and it's on for a certain amount of time and then it's off.
right.
So
It burns out. It might be more because it
yeah,
obviously a burned out light doesn't come back on, and so that metaphor describes exactly what you were intending, where it doesn't necessarily rise up again.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
If Mick West's low information zone is his contribution to the field, then I'm hoping that the Christmas tree problem will be mine. I've already heard from a couple of authors who said, "Oh, that's a great analogy. I'm going to put that in my book." So
Uh-huh.
hopefully that catches on.
Mhm. Let's see. Oh, yes. This is a question for me, and that is, I realize this may not be very likely, but wouldn't it be exciting if such civilizations could evolve on two planets within the same solar system? So two separate, and there, of course, there could be what's called, as you know, panspermia, where one planet seeds the other due to a huge impact of a asteroid or whatever, that then the organic material, the life perhaps, gets from one planet to the other, rather than totally independent evolution of life on those two planets. That's probably extremely rare, but I wonder if it might happen at least once inside of of our galaxy, a single solar system with two, and again, who knows if they would evolve at roughly the same time, the arising of life, and then that would be very interesting, because then we could have two civilizations interacting with each other in person, because traveling across a solar system is feasible by physical laws that we know.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of surprising to me that there is not life on Mars that we've discovered yet,
Mhm.
because Mars has pretty much all the elements. Obviously it's much more inhospitable than the Earth. You're not likely to have complex life forms, but if you look at some of the extremophiles that we have on Earth, and that's not too far different from some of the conditions that we find on Mars, where we know we have liquid water, at least under the surface, or we've definitely have frozen water because we've observed that directly.
Mhm.
So might there be some kind of extremophiles on Mars? I suspect there might. I know we haven't detected any proof of it yet, even though a number of crackpots have claimed that they have, but they're wrong. Um, so I'm holding out hope for Mars. Certainly holding out hope for Europa and Titan and some of these other large moons that we have out there that we're planning missions to go check out in more detail.
Mhm.
It's certainly not impossible. Whether you're going to have two planets with both have great enough conditions for complex life forms, I'd be more surprised if that. But I got to say, it's probably happened.
Right.
I did a We had a conversation with Fraser Kane from Universe Today a couple of months ago that I've got up on my YouTube channel, and Fraser's of the opinion that there is no life anywhere in the galaxy. Now that's a fringe view, but
Mhm.
it's not completely unsupportable.
Mhm.
It's a minority view for sure, but the basic idea behind it is because the universe is so huge with so many stars and so many possible exoplanets that you're talking large numbers, so large that anything that's remotely possible is actually inevitable.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's remotely possible is a life form that becomes so successful it takes over the entire universe in
Mhm.
some form or another,
Mhm.
whether that's with self-replicating robots or whatever it is. If it's at all remotely possible, it's inevitable.
Mhm.
And the entire universe has not been taken over by some life form or robots or something. And
Yeah.
so, therefore, the only deduction you can make is that there is no life anywhere.
Right.
Because if there was any life anywhere, that could have happened.
Mhm.
I don't subscribe to that. I think there's a lot of problems with that theory. But Fraser does, and a lot of other people do as well. It's
Mhm.
still definitely a minority view, but I would hope it's not. I would hope it's not true, and I would hope it's not the explanation why we have no microbes on Mars yet.
Mhm. Um, yeah, there's no question that when we look out into the galaxy and other galaxies as best we can, we don't see unambiguous evidence of like uh, incredible engineering
Right.
projects, right?
Yeah.
And
Dyson spheres and so forth.
exactly. So looking for robots is more difficult because they may be small and may conceal themselves. Whereas it would be very hard to hide, uh, you know, uh, you know, an amazing type of project that a solar system
Right.
spanning project or something like that. And I did want to get into that in that point in your movie that you said, why would all the aliens fail to be sociable? I guess was the word that you use, and that they wouldn't try to contact us if they're here, landing on the White House lawn, for example, as you mentioned. And I wonder what you think of the idea of seeing these as the best problem solvers in the galaxy. And, almost certainly that would be what we would be having in our solar system if they're, sending all these self-replicating robots or whatever out. And so if they interact with us, that disrupts the information they could get by observing us without interacting with us. So I think that might be a fair thing to include with your comments in that movie where you say that, they wouldn't all adhere to that principle. Some of them might be aggressive, as you said, and of course we're not being attacked, or they would be sociable, and we don't see that either. But also, I think they would be, staying away from us because they don't want to interfere with what they're learning from observing this evolving
Yeah.
species.
The Star Trek Prime Directive sort of.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe. Um, so, and I did want to connect to that because you came back to it very later, much later in the movie, where you said they may be sending out their equivalent of Voyager 1 and 2, Pioneer 10 and 11. And of course, it's so hard to find those. And so we're looking for signals, radio signals instead. So you touched on the subject briefly, but then you didn't revisit it. The idea that there could be, robot probes or just one somewhere in our solar system with tremendous remote sensing capabilities, and that we would never find it. It would actually probably be intended to avoid detection.
Yeah,
Um,
it all comes down to energy requirements.
yes,
And this is where we're purely hypothesizing here, right?
that's right.
Um, if you have, and this is something I actually had in that conversation with Fraser Cain, you might have heard old urban legends where some road workers in the 1800s chopped open a rock and a frog jumped out of it.
Huh, yes.
But there's lots of stories like that. So if the frog actually was mummified or something inside this rock and was able to jump out when he was finally disturbed, I went into great detail and I did a podcast episode on this years ago.
Mhm.
The frog had to you can't have a zero energy state. The frog can't be at zero and able to be immortal inside that rock until finally it wakes up and jumps out. He always has to have, in order to be wakeable, upable, he has to have some metabolism going. There has to be some energy output happening.
Mhm.
And the distance between stars, I'm sorry, that no matter how small that draw is, it's just more than you're going to be able to take with you.
Mhm.
So I don't care if you've got, a radioisotope thermal generator or even a small nuclear power plant or, a breeding reactor or something, you're going to run out of energy in, decades at most let's go centuries or millennia, that's probably not even long enough to make it to a different star system. So the energy requirement's definitely a huge problem. And that's why if anything ever does get here physically, it's definitely going to be a low energy dumb probe. And why it's much more likely we're just going to have electromagnetic communications. As far as taking people from planet to planet, you know, physics just doesn't give us a way that that might be possible.
That's right.
Certainly practical.
Yeah. What if this robot can stop at places along the way and essentially refuel? Of course, I don't know what that means, and that might rule out my question from the get-go. But perhaps these dumb robots from the ETs can solve the problem that you just described by refueling, you know, stopping at particular planets and exploiting whatever resources they have there to carry on to their target. I don't know.
Yeah, there's the basic theory is called the grabby aliens theory. There's a website, grabbyaliens.com, that kind of goes into detail on this.
Interesting. I know nothing about this. All
Yeah,
right.
that's the idea that they might be able to do that, and if they can do it at all, then it's inevitable and it's going to be happening somewhere in the galaxy. And according to this conjecture, I would call it, such a civilization could theoretically be expanding at the speed of light. It would be so big and cover so much of space at some point. I just don't see it happening. I see it too dependent on these interstellar distances and maintaining significant energy output over outrageous time spans of thousands of years. So I don't buy that you can have a robot that's going to refuel itself along the way to get to something that's going to be 200,000 years away.
Yeah.
And plenty of people would disagree with me. And again, I go back to this is all just conjecture and hypothesizing. And what we need is evidence. And so far, we don't have any evidence that anyone's ever visited us.
I see. Yeah, even if you were to make it dormant, so it's completely inert, and you kick it towards its destination, and of course, mid-course corrections would be an issue. But let's say that you're great at kicking it in the right direction, and then it's supposed to come back to life at the destination and get into orbit around the target star, in our case, the sun. Even then, that I can't think of as an engineer. Of course, I'm a human 21st century engineer, how to you know, completely be dormant because of your energy issue that you described.
Yeah, and the explanation that the alien visitation believers always give is, well, aliens are smarter than us. They can do things that we can't.
Yes,
Which,
I think
yes, I'm
that's
sure we can do things they can't, and they can do things we can't. But we're not talking about major changes to the laws of nature.
that's right. Yeah, that is the most replayed part of your movie on YouTube, as you probably noticed. So
Yeah.
some or many of our participants are probably familiar with watching a YouTube video. It doesn't work, I think, on Firefox, but on Google's Chrome browser. That if you hover your mouse over the progress bar at the bottom, you know, showing how far you are into the program you're watching, you'll see a graph pop up, and it shows what parts of the program you're watching have been most frequently replayed. And that part, can aliens skirt physics, is the most replayed part of your movie on YouTube. And that's where you describe hey, they can't cheat. They have to follow the laws of physics that we have discovered. And of course, they may have discovered additional ones that we haven't discovered yet, but they can't contradict these existing known discovered laws. And I think people are attracted to that section and just want to make sure they understand what you're saying and so on. And I assume you're happy with the film as is. There's no other clarification you would need to that section that people keep watching again and again.
I made that presentation as best as I could possibly make it, but if you read the YouTube comments, it's clear that that's one of the major pushbacks from
Yep.
the alien visitation believers. They just say aliens are smarter than us, laws of the universe don't apply to them. They've figured out how to travel instantaneously to anywhere. They've figured out all these things that, we know is impossible.
Mhm.
Um, and people just won't be dissuaded. And the only thing I can say is that's not scientific thinking. That's wishful thinking.
Yes.
I wish that were true too. If it were, we'd have evidence of aliens visiting us. So we know it's not true.
Mhm. Yeah, you very thoroughly described they cannot violate physical laws. So that part is off the table. But instead, is it possible that they know physical laws that we don't? And of course, these physical laws do not contradict the laws that we know, but they are relevant to the problem. Let me give an example, which is, of course, broadly labeled as speculation. And that is, if they were in the room here with us or online with us, they would say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Do not waste your time trying to get as close as you can to the speed of light. That works, but it's not the sensible way to get around the galaxy. Here's how you get around the galaxy. And then it's something else. And it's some physical laws we don't know yet. And I'm going crazy here in my conversation with my friend last night, where it's like they know how to get into another universe, and that universe has different physical laws, different constants that we have than we have. And in fact, maybe that's why we don't see them here, is they've gone to a much more interesting universe than this one in terms of physical laws and capabilities that those allow. Anyway, and then they move around in that universe much more readily to other stars or whatever it is that exist in that universe. So they may have actually left our universe, or there's some other way. And of course, people mention wormholes or things like that.
Wormholes, warp drives, interdimensional travel. Yeah,
That's
people just throw out science fiction terms that they've heard on
exactly,
movies.
exactly. And so those things are probably, or who knows, unreal, but there could be real physical laws that are like, oh, that's the method that you use to get somewhere else. And so anyway, you don't, you in a way you do touch on that in your film, so it doesn't disrupt it, because you say maybe let's see, what was your phrasing, something like maybe our mathematics are wrong or something like that, and then you get into the, hey, why aren't they sociable, why aren't they attacking us, and so on. So it's all it's all clean there, and yet these protesters, that's not the right word, the complainers or whatever on YouTube and the criticisms, they don't seem to come to grips with that either. And so I sort of sympathize with them, because there's this other perspective that they're not contradicting physical laws, but simply they know ones that are pertinent to how to get around.
The thing is, that is such a fundamentally irrational perspective. It's like, okay, I want them to be magical, so I'm going to grant them these powers that I've just invented, um, wormholes and interdimensional travel,
Mhm,
because that supports my view that they visit us.
mhm.
Look around; there is no evidence that they visit us. So, you're this magical thing you've added to the universe. Um, is sort of there's no evidence for it, and
Yeah,
you can't just make things up. And I mean, there's no evidence, so we know
that's
that
right.
hasn't happened.
That's right. Yeah. Again, labeled as speculation. What is it that we haven't discovered yet? So the unknown unknowns. If your film had been made with Thomas Edison 120 some years ago,
Mhm.
that was before Einstein had said, "Hey, we figured out that we can't, special relativity, we can't go faster than the speed of light." So there could be practically useful physical laws that we will someday discover. But again, I'm labeling everything super bright as speculation. And as you say in your movie, we've set the bar of evidence very high here because these are extraordinary claims and it simply cannot bring in, well, it's undiscovered physical laws that are going to allow them to come here. And then, as you said, where's the evidence of them?
Yeah.
I guess it was Fermi that said, where are they? You know, it's a reasonable question because the galaxy is so old. We should expect there to be, probably expect there to be super civilizations, and yet we don't see them. And the explanation might be that they have concealed themselves and that they're the best problem solvers in the galaxy, as I said, and they don't want to disrupt the observation of this evolving life on this particular planet we live on. Anyway, very speculative, and I do want to label it there rather than somebody listening and saying, "Oh, they're saying about these physical laws we don't know yet." Yeah, yeah. It's speculation, speculation. By the way, if people want to Google, you know, what we have just discussed in terms of, oh, they're observing us or whatever, I guess the term, the Google phrase is zoo, as in like, you know, where the lions and tigers live, zoo hypothesis. But it seems like a weird name for it. I think probably Wild Kingdom, you know, that TV show that had, you know, cameras out in Africa, you know, filming in their natural environment because we're not in cages here on Earth and we're in our natural environment. And I did want to ask, you know, the SETI part of your presentation was at the end, and uh, how far along are we in SETI? So are they starting to get pessimistic about there being alien civilizations, or is it like, no, no, we've got so much more to look through in time and obviously in every direction and radio frequency? What's the state of that? You touched on how many exoplanets we found, but how far are we in searching the galaxy for super civilization transmissions?
We haven't really been able to start yet because the main way you're going to do that is by looking for biosignatures and technosignatures on exoplanets. And that requires being able to resolve the spectrum of a planet that we can see.
Yes.
We can detect the exoplanets, but we can't resolve their spectra yet.
Mhm.
The James Webb Space Telescope, I give it maybe a 5% chance of being able to. It can almost, but not quite. The next generation telescope that's going to replace it or supplement it is called the Habitable Worlds Observatory,
Yes.
which is designed specifically to be able to characterize exoplanetary spectra. That's, I think, I'm going to give that a personal speculation only, personal opinion. I'm going to give that one a 85% chance of detecting biosignatures somewhere.
Mhm.
But that's not going to launch for 30 years.
That's interesting. So SETI, listening for signals near the watering hole, as you described, that's not as interesting as the Habitable Worlds Observatory. Did I hear you correctly?
Well, that you kind of have the same problem. I mean, you can decide where exactly am I going to listen to and for how long and on what frequencies.
Mhm.
And that's just such an enormous question mark. It's a universe full of question marks.
Mhm.
Once we can detect a spectrum that's a likely candidate, then you can point a radio telescope directly at that. And
Mhm.
now you've got, you know, at least a snowball's chance in hell of hearing something.
Yes.
Just pointing a telescope out there randomly, you've got, you know, essentially a negligible chance of hearing anything. So
Mhm.
I would say we haven't really been able to get started.
Mhm. I wonder if the SETI community has thought about you know, this prime directive, as you said earlier, you know, don't interfere. And that's why we don't see signals from the smartest problem solvers in our galaxy, because they don't want to disrupt our um, evolution. I shouldn't use that, our development, our civilization emerging. And so they're quiet rather than, you know, if we picked up a signal, it would be it would be a different world we live in, and they might want to avoid that. I don't know if the SETI people are, what sort of consideration they've given that hypothesis that it's the same reason we wouldn't expect them to interfere if they were in the solar system. They wouldn't want to put out these radio signals that we would pick up. Any thoughts
Well,
about that?
there certainly may be some civilizations out there that's their plan. There are certainly others that have different plans than that, and we haven't heard from any of them. So, um, that was what I was talking about in the film. With so far, nobody has jumped out on the White House lawn to say hello. So by extension, there's probably nobody has been here, because if it was possible for people to get here, at least some of them would have been the ones that want to jump out on the White House lawn and say hello. So the same goes for that. If
I wonder if, I'm sorry, go ahead.
if anyone had jumped out on the White House lawn, then I would say it's equally likely that there's people visiting us and orbiting the Earth and cloaking their spaceship or something.
Right. Um, uh, Regarding our not having picked up a SETI signal yet, I guess there's another possibility, and I don't remember the technical terms used in the SETI literature, where they may be using other technologies. Again, it's physical laws we don't know yet, right sign labeled speculation. But just as we don't look for smoke signals here in our contemporary world, we have our cell phones and so forth. We don't communicate using smoke signals anymore. So if somebody were out looking for smoke signals, they'd be like, well, there's nobody communicating. And in fact, they're not looking at the cell phone signals, and maybe that's what's going on. Where almost nobody uses these watering hole or any other radio frequencies because there's something much more practical, much more useful to communicate across the galaxy.
Well, if you're hoping to be heard by someone, this is not just expecting that they're going to start watching reruns of I Love Lucy. That's
Yes.
kind of the classical example that's been transmitting out into space. Well, no, radio signals bear the square cube law. I mean, it's not going to that signal is not going to last very far at all. If we wanted anyone to hear us, maybe they'd have a better chance of detecting some of our atmospheric nuclear detonations. That's much more likely that an artificially produced radio signal that's going to reach out into space further. But if we really wanted to reach someone, we'd have to know exactly who we're trying to reach and where they are and where they will be when the radio signal gets to them, and aim a very large dish, a very large transmitter with a hyper collimated signal aiming directly at them.
It would be such a feeble signal, all of that would be necessary to obtain it.
Yeah.
By the way, I did look in on the YouTube comments as you mentioned earlier.
I'm
And
sorry to hear that.
I found one that wasn't completely crazy, and there are, I'm sure, others that aren't completely crazy. And I think I know how this could be answered, and I'll read it to you here. The way this program, your movie, is presented is with earthly human concepts and human way of thinking. And of course, the only thing I would respond with that is, well, what else do we have to solve problems except our earthly human concepts and human way of thinking? And what are your thoughts in response to this person?
Yeah, I mean, what that person is really thinking is aliens aren't as limited in their thought processes as we are.
Right.
We see everything as what we know, and we're so arrogant that we think that's what everyone knows.
Right.
That's a really old familiar argument. It's an excuse for aliens being magic. Aliens have the capabilities to do things that we can't imagine.
Right.
What was the book by the guy that wrote The Martian? His second book, Hail Mary. He had an alien race in that we went off to another planet and they went off to that same place, and we met this alien race, and it was very interesting. I thought it was wonderful what he did. Is that race didn't understand time dilation and they didn't understand radiation. These were things they were totally unaware of.
Oh,
They didn't have sight. They had different senses than us. They worked with sound and they could see inside machines and were incredible engineers. They had a whole different set of skills than us and different bits of knowledge. And I think that's a much more realistic difference in what we're going to find between alien races. They're good at some things, we're good at other things that they're not good at. It's going to be that kind of differences rather than this species is magic and has all-powerful omniscience over the entire universe and can break the laws of nature.
I would say, though, that if our 2020s civilization were to encounter our 1850s civilization counterparts, right there we have 100% certainty of two different civilizations, from the 1850s and the 2020s, where they're saying, hey, that's analogous to that. Our ancestors encountering our contemporary selves show that there is such a thing as, oh, they know physical laws that the 1850s people don't know. They can solve problems and it looks like magic, as Arthur C. Clarke famously said about advanced technology looking like magic. And what are your thoughts about comparing two definite civilizations with different knowledge of the physical world, 1850s civilization and 2020s civilization?
There's not as much difference as you might think. We're not really able to do anything that they couldn't have done back then. A lot of times I hear people say things like, "Oh, science was sure that flight was impossible."
Oh, right.
In the 1800s. Okay, show me the equations in the 1800s that proved flight was impossible. That's an incorrect statement. There might have been people whose opinion was that flight was possible, but science did not prove that flight was impossible in the 1800s. People just thought that because they hadn't come up with the equations to describe it yet. Or they didn't even have the equations to describe the calculus and stuff when the Wright brothers flew. That was more or less a seat of your pants experiment. Yeah, so I don't really buy that argument either.
Okay. My friend really appreciated the segment that you made for your film, where you're talking to pilots and air traffic controllers and putting things in perspective about pilots being fallible, because that's an important part of our contemporary, congressional hearings and the news media and so forth, to put things in perspective, that even our military pilots are human. And so you really appreciated your having that aspect as a chapter in your production.
Yes, actual pilots appreciated that too, because actual pilots are as tired as the rest of us at hearing. Pilots are trained observers, and pilots can't be mistaken about things they see in the sky because they hear that as often as we do, and it's equally frustrating for them.
Our January speaker, former captain, later major in the U.S. Air Force pilot, Steve Lundquist. Actually, that talk was about how he and his crew were fooled by something they saw during a flight, and it turned out it was the planet Venus. But I would say he and his crew figured it out before they landed, but still there was this significant time interval where they thought that there might be an aircraft either on collision course with them, or that they were pacing it based on its position in the sky.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it's funny that Venus remains the king of false UFO reports.
Or queen, yes.
Or the queen, yes, thank you. Even after all these decades of people saying, no, I know what Venus looks like, I wouldn't be fooled by Venus. It's still the thing that fools people more than anything else.
Right. And that feeds into my favorite part of your film, and that is the Jimmy Carter UFO.
Ah, yes.
So what's remarkable about that, and you didn't get into that in your movie, I think for good reason, but it's a great skeptic's cautionary tale, because the first successful investigator was Robert Schaefer. He's a well-known skeptical UFO investigator. And back in 1977, his contributions to this investigation were being able to figure out what the date of the sighting was, because future President Carter didn't fill in the report until it became public some years later. About 4 years later is when he first filled out the UFO report about it. And he thought it was from October 1969, but it turned out to be from January 1969. And that was Robert Schaefer was able to figure out that issue. And then when he discovered Schaefer, it was like, oh, the planet Venus was essentially in that same place in the sky. He identified the Jimmy Carter UFO as Venus and said, Carter isn't the first person to see it this way. And, I would say that there were some contradictions with President Carter's report where he said it was not a star-like object, but there could be, intervening cloud or some other atmospheric effects that make Venus look larger in the sky and so on. And I think that's where Schaefer settled, to that conclusion. And also that Carter didn't report seeing Venus near the object, rather just saw this object. Therefore, it was probably Venus. But anyway, and then the rest of the story is as you presented in the movie with, the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe podcast, the physicist involved in the U.S. Air Force, launches out of Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, and so on. And Schaefer agrees that this is in fact the explanation. These chemical releases creating colorful clouds, and the newspaper articles at the time that showed, well, not just Carter, but many witnesses saw this, and it was identified at that time. And so, darn it, if only Schaefer had kept digging to find these newspaper headlines from that date, he would have realized, oh, wait a minute, it's this rocket cloud, this release of chemical for studying the Earth's magnetic field or whatever, rather than Venus. And as your movie says, the grandson says, my grandfather knows Venus. He's a Naval Academy grad, and he had the correct position in terms of elevation above the horizon, but he didn't say, oh yes, it was near Venus, and so that's what added to the confusion. But there's no question that's what the future president saw, and so it's a wonderful story. In illustrating how to dig into these, having these solved UFO cases is so educational for the viewer, I think.
Yeah, Josh was really adamant. He wanted me to make sure to include that this was not Venus, because he said his grandfather that was one thing that made him mad more than anything else over all the decades, was that people kept telling him that he'd seen Venus.
Mm-hmm.
He said, no, we didn't see Venus. I know what Venus looks like.
Yep.
It's nothing to do, nothing like a star.
Yep.
So that's actually something that was added kind of after the fact, that whole part.
Mm-hmm. Now, I looked at Carter's, handwritten UFO report, the questionnaire from a UFO group, and he filled it in. He did estimate it was 300 to 1,000 yards away, which is, of course, incorrect. But I mean, what can you do? You're seeing an object you don't understand, and you're trying to make an estimate of how big it is and how far away it is. And Carter's human, just like any of these pilots you were mentioning a few minutes ago. And so anyway, it's an interesting case in so many ways, and educational for skeptics as well as lay people.
Yeah, of course, it's impossible for anyone to judge the distance of anything without either triangulating data or some kind of reference point.
Yep.
You can hit a golf ball down the golf course And the only reason you're able to estimate, oh, I hit it about 300 yards is because you know how far away the pin is and the other things out there that you see as reference points. Without those, there is no way that any human or machine can detect the distance of a single point, a single object in the sky.
The Mick West part where he's analyzing the Navy videos, obviously, and that's the longest segment that you dedicated in your film, I think.
Yeah.
And it's such a popular, regular folks that don't follow UFO stories much, they'll be like, oh yeah, what's up with the Navy video? So such a good thing to have that much attention devoted to it because it'll connect with anyone, I think, watching your film. And he does such a great job of, here's how to think about this and convey it to the public. Another aspect that occurred to me was, not so much the pilot's testimony, but what do the experts on these sensors have to say? For example, Raytheon is the company that created, what is it called? FLIR or something, FLIR is the name of the sensor. And their president of technology development and execution at Raytheon Space and Airborne Systems is someone named Dr. Steve Cummings, and I Googled this. And he says, to be really sure of the sighting, we would need the raw data. And then he continues, visual displays alone are not the best evidence. I would want at least two sensors like radar and then paraphrased electro-optical infrared to search the skies. One way to actually verify these and be absolutely certain that this is not an anomaly is to get the same target behaving the same way on multiple sensors. And I was frustrated that the news media did not flock to the experts on the sensor and obsess on that rather than, oh, the pilot says such and such. It's like, no, I want the subject matter expert on this device that we're using to look at this mysterious, so-called mysterious object.
Yeah, I had a friend who actually was an engineer on the at FLIR, but it turned out to be the generation before the one that was on the F-18. He didn't want to talk about it anyway. And there's only a limited number of things he could say about it.
Understood.
Yeah, this is one thing you hear from the UFO people on Twitter, for example, all the time, is that they are absolutely insistent that the radar data does exist for those three famous Navy videos, which if it does, nobody has ever presented it. You just say, well, I want to believe that corroborating evidence exists. It just doesn't, it's never been shown to anyone, it's being suppressed or whatever. But yeah, we don't have that.
One thing that's very intriguing about the Mick West segment is he makes a testable hypothesis about the gimbal video. He says it's a distant plane 20 to 30 miles away, flying away from the sensor. Could we sort of duplicate this? I assume the US Navy may have done this on their own to say, oh, let's see. And of course, there's probably plentiful targets at a particular distance, and that they could recreate this and see if Mick has the right idea. What are your thoughts about, his testable a falsifiable hypothesis? That's science.
Yeah, I'm sure that could be done. In fact, the interesting thing to me is that the name of that video, the actual name on the video file that was released is Gimbal. They named that video Gimbal. They didn't name that video Rotating Alien Flying Saucer.
Right.
So it's like I actually suspect that video was saved because it is exemplifying what happens when the gimbal rotates. I mean, we don't know. We don't have any. We don't know. There's very little information on the chain of custody of that video, or how it came to be, how it came to into the hands of the UFO people who released it. But that's my bet on why that video exists in the first place.
One of the videos that you examined with Mick was taken by a Navy sailor and it shows this triangular object or objects.
Mhm.
And as you described, it was the aperture of this camera is the triangular cause for this shape. But it occurs to me, doesn't this hypothesis suggest that the sailor wasn't candid about what he saw? Because I assume he was also looking up at the sky with his own eyes as well as with the camera. And he realized, oh, these are stars and Jupiter, as you say in the film, and not triangular. And it's only when he looked at it in the playback of the video that he saw these extraordinary shapes. Not to libel anybody, but doesn't that suggest that the Navy sailor wasn't candid?
I think more likely he was just mistaken. I mean, these are 18, 19-year-old kids who are, he had this was his own personal camera. This wasn't a Navy camera.
Yes.
And he was, had limited familiarity with its characteristics probably. And what he saw through the lens was these weird flying triangles.
Mhm.
And a lot of people who see UFOs, they think things like, well, gee, maybe this is only visible through a camera, not visible to the naked eye. So I really can't speculate on what might have been in his head.
Yeah, good point. I hadn't really thought about that he may have believed that the camera was seeing something that he wasn't seeing. So he was seeing stars, but the camera was seeing something his unaided eyes couldn't perceive.
I just know we hear that kind of thing a lot from people who produce ghost videos or UFO videos or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And I do believe that people are honestly mistaken far more often than they're being deliberately deceptive.
Mhm. And near the end of your film, you have a segment dedicated to what you describe as your pet peeve, the idea that UFOs are, in some cases, secret US aircraft, being tested. And one of our participants has joined us from Turkey, and he wonders if people are sighting objects, some of which are deployed or operational systems, reconnaissance drones, etc., from the USA. And then the USA is happy to publicly say, gosh, we don't know what those are, because they don't want to just say to the public, oh, yes, that's our latest drone. What are your thoughts about that perspective?
When someone publishes a video they took of a light in the sky, the US government doesn't have any idea what airplane that was that might have been the cause of it. So they're not going to say, oh, he filmed our thing. We better cover it up by coming up with a cover story. Um, the guys on Metabunk, Mick West's forum,
Yes.
they will take a video like that, and they've just got they crowdsource it out to so many people in that forum, and they're able to do amazing work figuring out exactly where and when a video was taken, what angle it was pointing at, where the stars were in the sky, comparing that to the publicly available flight database to see what airplanes might have been in the area. And
Nice.
that stuff can be done,
Uh-huh.
and it often is when there's enough information.
Uh-huh.
But some random government spokesperson who gets a call from a news station is not going to sit down and go to all that work.
That's right. Okay, that makes sense. The camera would have a date and time and GPS in terms of latitude and longitude. And then, as you said, this crowdsourced expertise that can help actually figure out what this blob is, and that there aren't two blobs, therefore it's this plane that we know for sure is in that direction at that time.
Yeah.
That's yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, and the green triangle video was solved in exactly that way, with a
Mhm.
lot of people who knew a lot of things about what's in the sky and what it looks like,
Mhm.
and even people who knew what kind of camera anomalies will come from what kinds of different night vision cameras.
Mhm.
It's a pretty impressive group of talent.
Mhm. As you know, yesterday the Defense Department released a report to the public, um, you know, uh, showing Congress and now the American people what it is that the U.S. government has done over the really decades to try to understand UFOs, and it has a section which I think might pertain to your pet peeve. So as you may have looked through this already, it just came out, but one of the later sections of it is titled Testing and Development of U.S. National Security and Space Programs Most Likely Accounted for Some Portion of UAP Sightings. And so it's got, you know, rocket launches, the Apollo space program, the Canadian plane that has sort of a flying saucer appearance to it. And I thought about you when I saw that section. I was like, oh, this is exactly, and I think you make such an excellent point in your film that these exotic objects are typically kept away from the public view in Nevada test range and so on. And although that perhaps this is somewhat different than that because they're using unclassified technology, it's just not familiar to the public. But is that distinction significant?
Well, obviously some of the things on their list and that was more plausible than others. People see rocket launches that go out of control and spin and make those spirals in the air,
Oh,
all
yes.
kinds of weird, colorful clouds. People report that rocket launches as UFOs all the time.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, kind of obviously people are misidentifying things that they say in the sky. So they were right. I don't think it was necessary for them to say, they pointed out one or two of those weird little flying saucer shaped aircraft that never got more than 6 inches off the ground. And I don't think
Right.
it's very likely that anyone saw one of those flying over their house in suburban Los Angeles.
Right. Yeah. By the way, by coincidence, some friends of mine have just come back from Iceland, and a few days ago they saw one of these spiraling, rocket fuel releases by a SpaceX launch over Iceland, and he texted me the beautiful photo, and I
Oh,
can
wow.
see why people would be amazed. I've seen these before, but now I know someone who's been an eyewitness to this phenomenon. It's an amazing sight. And
Yeah.
as people get more and more acclimated to, oh, here's what Starlink looks like, as you mentioned earlier in your presentation or your discussion here, and other things. In fact, I said to our January U.S. Air Force pilot, I wish your colleagues or your modern equivalents would get training in this because now there's all these wonderful videos of, oh, here's what Starlink launch looks like, or train. Here's what this rocket fuel dump looks like. Here's what fireballs look like. That surprised many pilots over the decades. But now we have these wonderful videos, and I'd like that to be part of standard pilot training, and for that matter, maybe the whole public, so that we don't have people clogging up our communication lines with things where it's like, hey, that's just Starlink, folks, or that's an Aurora, that's the rocket fuel dump, etc. What are your thoughts about that?
I say good luck on expecting that to happen. Uh, the general public is not likely to receive formalized training in what kinds of things are not alien spaceships, but you might see in the sky.
Yeah. Oh well. I'd love for that to be
Nor would it make any difference if that training was given to them.
Oh,
They would still
interesting.
see what they want to see.
Good point. All right. Um, do you mind if I ask you a silly question? And you may say, you already used up your quota, but I did have a silly question. And
What's that?
I think we're wrapping up here, and that's why I'm deploying my silly question. And that is, for a documentary, what are your thoughts about having a narrator with a British accent?
It makes the film seem much more credible, much more believable. Yeah,
Exactly. I've noticed that
absolutely.
the myth mongers, the purveyors of nonsense, use that technique frequently.
No, they're
And
smart.
yeah, and so anyway, it's just the way it is to have that. Richard Dawkins says brilliant things, but it sounds even brillianter. I don't know if that's a word when he's saying it. And anyway, I thought about that when I was watching your film, and it's like, good old Yankee know-how. We don't need British accents here, but I did notice that.
Yeah, I needed to use some kind of an AI filter to give myself a British accent. It would have done much better.
Or you could learn to speak in a British accent,
I
but
think I'd sound like Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins if I tried to.
all right. I'm looking through the window here, and I think. Oh wait, I do have our Hawaiian mentions the SR-71. So this was a high altitude reconnaissance plane, credible speeds and altitudes, and I guess sort of a follow on to the U-2. I'm sorry, U-2 spy planes, and he says, I'm sure SR-71 was misreported many times. It could take off, land at Edwards, but absolutely flew outside that area before being publicly acknowledged. So someone looking up and seeing this strange object moving across the sky. And anyway, that is
There's two,
also
you wouldn't have seen the object itself. You just would have seen a contrail way up there
ah,
that would have looked the same as a contrail from any jet. So it wouldn't have looked distinctive. That's
mhm,
one thing I was talking about in the film is when we do see military jets, they don't look or perform differently than other civilian jets.
mhm,
They're not the SR-71 was certainly faster, but not that you could notice from the ground.
mhm.
And it's the same basic performance envelope as any other plane. So I doubt very much that it would have been responsible for a UFO report any more than any airliner would be responsible for a UFO report.
Yeah, that sounds right. And despite that, this report that was released by the Defense Department yesterday lists it. So it says,
Yeah, they listed the U-2 also, and that's an even worse example
right.
because the U-2, I mean, its configuration is identical to most unremarkable airplanes, and it
Mhm,
was not a fast plane at all. I mean, it
mhm.
would fly higher, but nothing that you could notice from the ground.
Right. I,
Yeah, I was not impressed with that part of the report, but I
mm,
think I got to say we haven't been very impressed with the government's handling of the UFO phenomenon at all in the
right.
last 7 years.
Now listen, your In Fact series, about 6 months ago or so, I'm going to post this in the chat, by the way. You did this uh, discussion of, who's who in UFOs, and it's like, oh, that's how this got sort of seeded, plugged into the U.S. government. And it's like a 4 or 5 minute video, and with uh, what's his name, Elizondo, and
Yeah,
yeah, and so on. And
it
uh,
was nice to hear them mention in the report that this whole thing is largely the result of a small group of individuals passing stories back and forth between one another.
exactly. I saluting you for
Thank
they
you.
essentially repeated your thesis in this official document, and that was
A
really
lot of people have been reporting this for a long time. It's not just me.
yes.
It's been well known to anyone who has the misfortune of having to follow this community for a living, like I do.
Yes, your video though is so well constructed. This one I just posted in the chat window from several months ago that says, "Here's the who's who," and it's you have yakety sax playing in the background, which is funny for Benny Hill fans recognizing that. Oh, by the way, this DoD report that came out yesterday references the National Capital Area skeptics. So if you
That's it.
text search in there for ncas.org. As you may know, we are the uh, host of the Condon Report, so the University of Colorado study from the late 1960s. The University of Colorado gave our group, the National Capital Area Skeptics, permission to host the online version. And it's been there thanks to volunteer work of our members, transcribing it from the book into HTML, and it's referenced with the link to our product in this DoD report. So
That
that,
is wonderful. I didn't realize that. I
yeah,
will look
yeah,
that up.
yeah,
Congratulations. That's great press.
yeah. And let's see. I think Rob Palmer, the well-known skeptic, says he worked on the F-22 and that these need to know that I guess he's talking about this insular compartmentalization where people are making assumptions in the intelligence community and the Defense Department about who knows what and how rumors start. And this document that came out yesterday, it's got about 40 or so pages of text and then the end notes. And I think it's very useful for people to get a rough idea about how this all started, these rumors, misunderstandings, and so on. And I was wondering, do you have any uh, comments about that report if you had a chance to look through it?
Yeah, only that there was nothing new in it. I mean, it was what everyone's already known for a long time. And the big question is whether it's going to change the minds of any of the UFO true believers.
Mhm.
And I'm adamant that absolutely it will not,
Yes.
because they just see this as more government deception, more government cover up, more poo-pooing and hiding the truth, the glorious truth about the aliens that we have hidden in the underground bases. So I don't believe this is going to change any minds. I don't think it's not going to make any difference. I hope it's going to reduce the amount of time and money and attention that Congress spends on this. But
Mhm.
you know, they're literally called the UFO caucus. The UFO caucus in the House is probably going to continue its pursuit because the people running that are definitely true believers.
Mhm. By the way, for any naysayers, I suspect we all have skeptics on our chat here, but I would say looking at this, there don't seem to be any internal contradictions in it. It seems to be a self-consistent product, which is usually a good sign that something is well thought out, thorough, reality-based. Whereas when we look at things that come from the more credulous investigators, where there's like gaps in thinking, where there's, hey, that doesn't make any sense, and so on. Whereas this does make sense and it's internally coherent. And I think that might help for some of the less or the more mild cases of people who are caught up in this myth.
It might. I'm not super optimistic. I mean, the people who are the true UFO believers did not arrive at their position through rational analysis of testable evidence,
Mhm,
obviously. So why would they change their ways now?
mhm. As we're wrapping up here, Brian, may I ask what's next for Skeptoid Media? What's your next project?
We've got quite a few next projects, actually. We're working on a new podcast. We're working on a new web series. We're just starting to work on our next documentary film, which is going to be one of two or three different topics. We're based on some negotiations that we're doing right now.
Mhm.
Um, so it's a pretty crazy busy year. I'm all stressed out all day, every day. Here it is, it's Saturday and I'm working.
Ah, well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time here. I know our participants also appreciate that. So I do want to thank you again for your time today and fighting through your cough or whatever, your respiratory
Yeah,
situation.
it hasn't been as bad as it could have. So let's all thank the gods for that.
Or whatever you might be taking to help. So yeah, thank you again, Brian, and be sure to visit his skeptoid.com website. Today's program was produced by JD Mack. Thanks, JD. On behalf of the National Capital Area Skeptics, I'm Scott Snell signing off from Greenbelt, Maryland. Please join us again on Saturday, April 13 at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on our YouTube site. We're going to be joined by Edward Calabrese. He's professor of environmental health sciences at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's going to discuss the controversy surrounding the assumption that there is no safe dose of ionizing radiation, no matter how low the dose. Public health regulations are generally based on that assumption. So that's Saturday, April 13, 1:30 p.m. Eastern, 5 days after the total eclipse of the sun. So see you then. Bye bye.